Hey everyone, welcome to this week's recap podcast for SNXweave. SNXweave is a grants-DAO initiative to improve communication and transparency across the synthetics ecosystem. We'll be giving quick weekly recaps of news and important updates from the Spartan Council and core contributors. As we get closer to the end of this epic, we'll be discussing in depth the individual outlooks, voting trajectories, debating arguments, and overall values of various DAO members in order to help support well-informed voting around election time. In today's weekly recap episode, we're going to be discussing the momentum of several SIPs, including an in-depth discussion of the possible account merging project, on which several council members and core contributors had strong opinions. So let's get started. Jumping right in last week's recap we discussed SIP 155, which proposes deprecating the SDAO and replacing it with the Treasury Council and Core Contributor Committee. Be sure to check out last week's blog post for a more in-depth background and description of this proposal. This week, SIP 155 was presented to the Spartan Council and community by Core Contributor Jordan. Several important aspects of this proposal were clarified during the presentation. First, Kane asked Jordan to explain the thought process behind the decision to have Treasury Council members elected by SNX stakers. Jordan explained that it's safer and more decentralized to have stakers elect them directly, rather than having them chosen by the Spartan Council. The trade-off here is that the candidates will need to be public. However, in the interest of transparency and in the ability for the community as a whole to make decisions on treasury management, there isn't really another reasonable alternative. While on the note of transparency, there was a question regarding who will be eligible and how many people will be on the Treasury Council. Jordan said that there will be 4 members, likely operating a 3 of 4 multisig. However, this will need to be finalized, and there will need to be additional thought put into the trade-offs when efficiently doing transactions while still thinking about security. Treasury Council members will be paid a monthly stipend of 1,000 SNX and may also be required to post an SNX bond if elected. However, the amount is not yet decided. There are a few small edits that Jordan will be making to SIP 155, however the Council didn't think it would require an additional presentation, so a vote will be coming soon for this proposal. Next, SIP 174 was also presented this week. Proposed by Justin, this SIP outlines a system to allow for redemption of deprecated synths. By creating a contract that allows holders to redeem deprecated synths at a fixed SUSD price, this SIP will create a more streamlined method for removing these synths from the protocol. This will deprecate the process of purging and replace it with a more elegant way of phasing out or updating synths. It was also decided this week that SIP 173, the Synth Upgrader contract, will be rejected in favor of 174. SIP 173 proposes a Synth Upgrader migration contract to more easily handle the various aspects of a synth's logic upgrade and to avoid system downtime. However, as we discussed, SIP 174 will provide a more elegant solution and an even easier mechanism for redeeming synths that have been deprecated. The Council, however, will vote on SIP 174 before officially rejecting SIP 173. Justin also presented SIP 175, which proposes diverting a set portion of the weekly SNX inflation for protocol maintenance and upgrades. Seeing as how the protocol DAO regularly uses a significant amount of Ethereum for gas to run the protocol, Justin proposes having 1,000 SNX automatically dispersed to the protocol DAO weekly rather than having to request funds every time the protocol DAO runs out of Ethereum. Spreek chimed in saying that there might be concerns about fixing 1,000 SNX per week indefinitely. Justin emphasized, however, that having an automatic system like this would greatly help streamline protocol updates and maintenance. Kane recommended waiting to see what process the new Treasury Council is in favor of, and suggested that the Treasury Council could perhaps just pay the PDAO a quarterly Ethereum budget from the Treasury. Justin said that he would be happy with this resolution as long as it gets sorted out in the next few months as soon as the Treasury Council is formed. This SIP discussion ended with Justin proposing to move SIP 175 to rejected in order to resubmit a proposal for the new Treasury Council to fund the PDAO once SIP 155 is approved. On last week's episode, we also discussed SIP 169, which proposes deprecating low-volume synths on L1. This SIP is waiting on the approval of Justin's SIP 174, which will greatly simplify the deprecation of these synths. As an update to last week's discussion regarding SIP 169, Andre would like to keep the 4x synths for some of the projects he's working on, so they will be listed in the SIP along with other synths that are staying on L1. Jordan will be presenting the SIP soon after the approval of SIP 174. Also in feasibility this week is SIP 120. For those of you who aren't familiar, SIP 120 proposes using Uniswap v3's TWAP price oracles together with Chainlink oracles to enable atomic exchanges between synths. SIP 120 was approved by the Council, however due to recent changes it has moved back into feasibility and will need to be presented again. Sitting in approved this week is SIP 149, which proposes deprecating binary options contracts. Though this SIP is ready for execution, Justin says it is paused for the moment. He says that the plan here is to create a contract that allows people who have longs and shorts to just withdraw some SUSD from them. Daniel suggested handling this by manually redeeming outstanding options for SUSD. It was agreed that this would be faster than setting up a contract, and that Daniel will likely be driving this effort since he has significant experience in this area as a co-founder of Thales. Last week, we spoke in detail about SIP 171, which will allow transfer of non-fee reclamation balances, and SIP 167 for an L2 bridged governance contract. 171 is still in feasibility, and there should hopefully be an update soon as Justin discusses presentation prep with Andre. 167 is still sitting in approved, however it is not quite ready for execution as Leo and Ale are still working to figure out if it will go out on the Murphac or Weezan release. The last discussion this week between the Spartan Council and core contributors was regarding the possibility of an account merging feature. Rafa brought this up as there has been some talk offline in the core contributor channel between him, Kane, Spreek, Daniel, and Brian about being able to migrate escrowed SNX. During this discussion, Daniel echoed some concerns from himself and others that this could make a large amount of SNX instantly liquid to sell over the counter. Kane, however, recapped some of the discussions about this issue in the past and pointed out that liquidity is pretty good right now, so this shouldn't be as much of a threat as maybe it used to be. As a compromise, Brian suggested having a cooldown period, where they would be emerging every 6 months rather than continuously. The necessity of this potential project as a whole was also questioned during this discussion. In response, Kane emphasized that there is a clear desire to be able to move addresses or cycle addresses for a new hardware wallet, and that tools like this would make such processes a little easier. Spreek also expressed concern regarding potential risk, and Kane suggested possibly turning on account merging for a month as a trial period to observe it with the option to switch it off if necessary. Lastly, Daniel suggested a possible threshold to limit the rate at which escrowed SNX can be pulled out. Rafa responded by saying there already is a time restriction, so adding the size restriction might be a bit much. Rafa will likely be putting together a pitch for the community for this potential project, so expect more updates to come. And that's it for today's updates. Be sure to check out our weekly blog post, share this podcast link, and let us know what you think and what you'd like to hear more about from SNXweave. Thanks for listening.